Well, this wasn't the result I was hoping for. I want to be clear from the start that I was a fan of xDefiant and I really wanted to see it succeed even now. As we'll get into this video, I'm far less optimistic and interested in this game right now. They've had a year to sort out issues, clean up the gameplay, and improve the game overall. I'm willing to say that whatever changes or fixes they've made does not reflect a year's worth of work towards a focused experience. I'm not saying these developers didn't do their job, I don't know what's going on, but it feels more and more like they struggle to fix their game and make it better than it was last year. Let's get into it. xDefiant had a new open test session for this weekend starting on April 19th. The session would show the team's hard work and improvements to server stability, netcode issues, and more. And sadly, even in their patch notes, they showed that their netcode is still being worked on. As I mentioned in my previous video, the netcode issue was publicly known about since March of last year. To their credit, or mismanagement, take your pick, they've had to change the operating system of their online servers and do a number of behind-the-scenes fixes to get the game to this point, which sadly doesn't feel any bit better than how the game was last year. I'm sure the netcode feels somewhat more consistent with this test, but it's not significantly improved. This has been a recurring pattern with xDefiant. Every open session they had one or two small issues, but the rest of the game felt fine. Then, the next test would come around and something else would break or feel different than what it was before. This time, the gunplay feels somewhat different. I do encourage you to take that with a grain of salt because it's been months since the last playtest we've had in November of 2023, and later in this video, you will see why. And of course, if you look on Twitter, or whichever way you wish to pronounce Twitter, you'll see a lot of back and forth, between people hyping up the game, and people outright hating its existence. I really wanted to see xDefiant find its footing and succeed. Maybe to some degree it will, regardless, but I'm not having fun with the current version of the game. I should also mention that I play the game on mouse and keyboard, so if you're on controller and not noticing that many issues, then more power to you. And before we continue, if you're enjoying the video so far, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to see more videos more often. xDefiant's gunplay was never revolutionary, nor is any part of this game. All it had to do was just provide a solid experience, and I believe it could grow from there. I've never had any issues with xDefiant's gunplay up until this session. The recoil patterns seem fine and are easy enough to learn, but again, there's something that feels off or is missing from this current version. It really feels like the game lost its identity with the gunplay it once offered. Again, maybe that's because of how long it's been since I played the game last, or because I put a lot of time into the finals and Modern Warfare 3, that xDefiant's gunplay feels foreign to me. And don't worry, I'm not going to compare xDefiant to these two other games directly, but there is some point where the quality of life and polish gets to be too much to just overlook because of how xDefiant is right now. But for reference, the finals was released in December last year and just started its second season. That game does have its issues, but the feel of the gunplay isn't one of them. Looking around at what people were saying online, there's this post by Sub1KD who shows an example that the weapon isn't lining up with the center of the screen during that transition from hipfire to aiming down sight, which is something that will make every mouse and keyboard player more inaccurate than a controller player.
Shifting around as I center in on the target. It starts off shifting, to gun points to the left, and then it shifts, and the whole screen kind of shuffles. And you can see it again. In slow motion, it's readily apparent. You can see a shift right as I land and try to bring it on. The whole thing shifts. And especially since it takes the point of aim away, like the white dot when I go into an ADS, the white dot goes away when I prepare to fire. The ability to actually stay on target to hit shots when you're trying to use movement in a game that should be movement based, it's counterintuitive.
There may be some RNG baked into that transition, so sometimes the KBM player will be able to make the better guess, but that's the problem at this point. It's now a guessing game as to where your sights line up, and less of a skill-based game. We'll have to see if that was intentional, or if they have any plans to address this at some point. This was also an issue that plagued KBM players in Modern Warfare 2, 2022, as this game did the same thing and more, which just made the game feel sloppy and unresponsive on KBM. This would also explain why it's difficult for me to track moving players. Moving on, it also seems like SMGs are going to be dominating xDefiant. The damage range you get from ARs don't seem to be good enough to keep up with SMGs at your typical mid-range firefights. It also doesn't help that these weapons will have that aim down sight variant going on that could throw off your aim. There haven't been any noticeable changes to abilities, so the issues I had with them in my previous videos still stand to this day. What I do enjoy about xDefiant is how the gameplay is focused more on the actual combat and not popping abilities at just the right time. The abilities themselves are still very strong in certain situations, but there's no big mix-up or changes this time around. Looking at the patch notes, this will also show that they didn't do anything. Fortunately for the game, there's not one ability or faction that's completely broken, but the healing faction, Libertad, is going to be very annoying to deal with. More so since everyone on the team could run the same faction and abilities if they like. I think the most jarring thing for me with this version of xDefiant is the character movement. This is something that others online have noticed as well for one reason or another. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels more difficult to read which direction characters are strafing, and being able to track them doesn't feel the same. This could also be affected by the recoil changes that I mentioned earlier. Players running SMGs with added mobility on their attachments make them zip around in a very unnatural way. It's not impossible to beat them, but it is something that I don't remember being as difficult to deal with. I really do hate that I can't be as specific as I want to be with my feedback, but there's only so much that I can remember, and so much that I can describe as to how the game once felt versus how it feels today. There have been a few patterns with xDefiant from test to test. Netcode has always been an issue in one way or another. Each version had some notable flaws to them, such as characters not appearing on the MVP screen post-game, weapons disappearing from players' hands, and other smaller issues. And while the game was fun for me last summer, every time they make changes to the code and the game, it feels further and further away from the gameplay I once enjoyed. I can't say for certain, but it really does feel like they tuned the game to be clunkier on mouse and keyboard, and are preferring controller players. It makes sense they're doing that since the game is being led by ex-COD director Mark Rubin and other developers, but I don't understand why they are making these changes now. The game was at a point where it could have both a competitive controller and mouse and keyboard communities. There was also a lot this game could have done to showcase the talents of both inputs. Right now, all they have to show for is less strict skill-based matchmaking for quick play matches, and input-based matchmaking. Maybe it wasn't intentional, and they just didn't have time or bother to try out these changes on mouse and keyboard. In the previous playtest, certain players would have a different experience than others, and there seems to be some differences that for some reason doesn't affect everyone. Maybe that's still going on with this playtest. Either way, xDefiant had the chance to be an alternative, free game that others could play, and the more dedicated players could rise through the ranks. Given enough time and proper support, the competitive scene might have taken off, and maybe it still will. But for me, unless they make some major changes to the game to get it closer to what it was before, at least for my input, I'm going to have to pass on the game for now. There is no doubt in my mind now that there have been some shifts happening during development, in one way or another, that is harming the overall experience of the game. I go into that in more detail in my previous video about xDefiant, so give that a watch to catch up on the drama that seems to be plaguing this game. As for me, I think I'll keep on with the games I've been enjoying and check back on xDefiant every now and then if it does find a way to stay alive. Until then, I am Mr. Rain, and I'll see you next time.